Your alarm screams. 4:47 a.m. Everyone else is asleep. You move in the dark. No applause, no witnesses, just you. What if winning happens before anyone knows you're competing? The world celebrates outcomes, but what about the invisible work that made them possible? Why do visible grinders burn out while silent ones break through? What separates secret preparation from wasted isolation? This isn't motivation. It's the blueprint they never filmed. One promise: finish this, and you'll never need permission again. Welcome to the space between ambition and achievement. The gap nobody photographs. The grind that doesn't get a documentary until it's already over. You're here because something inside you knows that the loudest voices in the room aren't always the ones doing the most important work. You've watched people announce their goals on every platform, shout their intentions into the void, and then quietly disappear when the work gets hard. You've seen the productivity gurus with their morning routine videos and their accountability posts, and you've wondered why so many of them seem to plateau while others, quieter ones, seem to simply arrive at success without warning. This is about those quiet ones. This is about you becoming one of them. Because here's what nobody tells you when you're starting out. Visibility is expensive. Every post, every announcement, every time you share your progress with the world, you're making a withdrawal from your focus account. You're inviting opinions, comparisons, and the subtle pressure to perform for an audience instead of for the goal itself. And that pressure, that constant low-grade anxiety about how your journey looks to others, it's costing you more than you realize. Think about the last time you worked on something in complete privacy. No updates, no check-ins, just you and the work. How did it feel? If you're honest, there was probably a freedom in that silence. A clarity. You weren't performing. You weren't managing anyone's expectations but your own. You were just building. And that's the state we're going to learn to protect and expand throughout this audiobook. Because that state, that invisible grind, is where real transformation happens. The world has trained you to believe that progress requires witnesses. Social media told you that if you don't document it, it didn't happen. Motivational culture convinced you that accountability means announcing your goals to anyone who'll listen. But here's the truth they don't mention. Every minute you spend narrating your journey is a minute you're not advancing it. Every dopamine hit you get from a supportive comment is a small substitution for the real satisfaction of actual progress. And every time you reshape your work to make it more shareable, you're optimizing for the wrong metric. This audiobook is going to challenge everything you've been taught about visibility and success. We're going to explore why the most successful people you've never heard of stayed invisible until the moment they couldn't be ignored. We're going to dissect the mechanics of silent progress and give you a framework for building momentum that compounds in the dark. And we're going to be honest about the cost of that choice. Because yes, there is a cost. Silence is uncomfortable. Working without witnesses feels lonely. And there will be moments when you wonder if you're just hiding instead of preparing. But by the time we're done, you'll have the tools to know the difference. You'll understand how to audit your energy for visibility traps. You'll build routines that create asymmetric advantages while others are still deciding what to post about. You'll learn to document your progress in ways that build evidence without requiring validation. And most importantly, you'll develop the psychological resilience to keep grinding when nobody's watching. Nobody's cheering and nobody even knows you're in the game. So here's what I need you to do right now. Before we go any further, I want you to acknowledge where you are, not where you wish you were, not where you're pretending to be online. Where you actually are. What have you been working on in secret? What have you been afraid to start because you can't figure out how to make it impressive enough to share? What goal have you been circling, unable to commit, because you're not sure how it would look to the people who know you? Sit with those questions for a moment. Don't rush past them. This entire journey depends on your willingness to be honest with yourself in the darkness. Because that's where we're going. Into the dark. Into the hours before dawn when everyone else is sleeping. Into the unglamorous, unsexy, repetitive work that builds foundations nobody sees. Into the rejection and the failure and the slow, grinding iteration that never makes it into anyone's highlight reel. And we're going to learn to love it there. Because that's where you win. Let me tell you about Marcus. Not his real name, but his story is real enough. Marcus worked in tech, decent salary, decent life, but he wanted more. He wanted to build something of his own. So he did what everyone does. He announced it. Posted about his new side project on LinkedIn, shared updates on Twitter, built in public as they say, and for the first few weeks it felt incredible. People liked his posts, left encouraging comments, some even asked to beta test. Marcus felt seen, validated, like he was finally doing something that mattered. But then the work got hard. The encouragement didn't translate into customers. The comments became questions he didn't have answers for. And suddenly, every evening when he sat down to code after his day job, he wasn't just fighting his own doubts. He was fighting the imagined disappointment of everyone who'd watched him start. What would they think if it failed? How would he explain it? Should he delete the posts? Double down? Pivot publicly? The mental overhead was crushing. Within 3 months, Marcus had stopped working on the project entirely. Not because it wasn't viable, because the audience he'd built for his journey had become a weight he couldn't carry. Now let me tell you about Sarah. She had the same idea, same timeline, same industry. But Sarah didn't announce anything. She worked on her project in complete silence. After her kids went to bed, in coffee shops on weekends, during lunch breaks. Nobody knew. Not her coworkers, not her extended family, not social media. For 8 months, Sarah was invisible. And in that invisibility, she was free. Free to fail without explanation. Free to pivot without announcement. Free to learn at her own pace without the pressure of progress reports. When Sarah finally launched, it looked like overnight success. Her first week did what Marcus had hoped his first month would do. People asked her how she did it so fast. She smiled and said she'd been working on it for a while. She didn't mention the 8 months. She didn't owe them the full story. The difference between Marcus and Sarah wasn't talent. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even work ethic. It was the decision about when to go public. Marcus built an audience before he built a product. Sarah built a product before she built an audience. Marcus optimized for validation. Sarah optimized for progress. And that difference, that single fork in the road, changed everything. You're standing at that fork right now. You can keep doing what you've been doing, posting your goals, sharing your journey, building in public. And some people do make that work. But if you're here, listening to these words, there's a part of you that suspects there's another way, a quieter way, a way that feels less like performance and more like purpose. And that suspicion is correct. There is another way. It's harder in some respects, lonelier, but it's also cleaner, purer. And for many people, it's the only way that actually works. So let's talk about what we're really doing here. This isn't a book about secrecy for its own sake. This isn't about becoming a hermit or refusing to share your wins. This is about sequencing, about understanding that there's a time for silence and a time for visibility, and most people get that sequence backwards. They go loud when they should be quiet, and by the time they have something worth shouting about, they've exhausted their audience and their own motivation. We're going to reverse that. We're going to learn to default to silence and emerge only when emergence serves the mission. Think of it like this. Every successful product, every successful company, every successful anything has a beta phase. A time when it's being built and tested and refined away from public scrutiny. Nobody expects you to launch version 0.1 to the entire world. So why would you do that with your goals? Why would you announce the earliest, most fragile version of your ambition to everyone you know? It doesn't make sense. But we do it anyway because we confuse accountability with visibility, and we confuse validation with progress. Real accountability is private. It's you checking in with yourself every single day. It's the promise you made in the dark and the action you take in the dark to honor that promise. It doesn't require an audience. In fact, an audience often dilutes it. Because when other people are watching, you start performing accountability instead of practicing it. You check boxes to show progress rather than to make progress. And that distinction, subtle as it sounds, is the difference between motion and movement. This audiobook is structured around a simple premise. You're going to learn to love the grind that nobody sees. Not just tolerate it, not just endure it, love it. Because once you fall in love with invisible work, once you find satisfaction in the process itself, rather than the external validation of the process, you become unstoppable. You're no longer dependent on likes or comments or encouragement. What are you building? That's the question you answered yesterday, or last week, or last month when you decided to take this seriously. You know what your invisible grind is. It's the skill you're developing, the project you're working on, the business you're building, the art you're creating, the thing that matters to you so much that you're willing to wake up before the sun to work on it. And you work on it now, in the silence, with no distractions and no witnesses. Just you and the work, pure, focused, uncontaminated by the need to make it shareable or impressive or understandable to anyone else. You work for 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours if you have it, and then the world wakes up. The light changes, you hear other people stirring, and just like that, the sacred window closes. But you've done what you came to do. You've put in the work that nobody will see. You've made progress that won't show up in any algorithm. You've invested in your future self in a way that requires patience and faith because there's no immediate payoff. And that's the point. That's the entire point. You're learning to derive satisfaction from the work itself, not from the external validation of the work. And that reorientation, that fundamental shift in where you find your motivation, is what makes you dangerous. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds isolating. This sounds like I'm asking you to become a monk, to cut yourself off from community and support and collaboration. But that's not what this is. This is about sequencing, remember? There's a time for collaboration, a time for community, a time for visibility. But that time comes later, after you've built something worth collaborating on, after you've developed skills worth sharing, after you've made progress worth celebrating. The mistake most people make is inviting community into the mess of the beginning and then wondering why they can't focus. You can't build a foundation while giving tours of the construction site. You have to build first, then invite people in. Let me tell you what happens when you get this right. When you master the invisible grind, when you put in 6 months or a year or 2 years of silent work, something shifts. You stop needing external validation because you have internal evidence. You look at what you've built in private, and you know what you're capable of. You don't need anyone to tell you. You don't need encouragement or cheerleading or someone to believe in you. You believe in yourself because you've proven to yourself, in the dark, that you can do hard things when nobody's watching. And that self-belief is unshakable. It's not based on compliments or followers or anyone else's opinion. It's based on the irrefutable fact of what you've accomplished in silence. That's the invisible advantage. That's what we're building. And it starts with a choice. The choice to default to silence, to stop announcing and start building, to work in the dark until you have something that can't be ignored in the light. Are you ready to make that choice? Because if you are, everything changes from here. The next few hours you spend with this audiobook are going to give you a framework for doing exactly that. We're going to go deep into the mechanics of invisible progress, the routines, the mindsets, the specific practices that separate people who talk about grinding from people who actually do it. And we're going to do it all with the understanding that nobody needs to know what you're learning here. This is between you and your future self, nobody else. So take a breath with me right now, seriously. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, just pause and breathe. In through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Out through your mouth for 6 counts. Do that 3 times. This is your body's way of signaling to your nervous system that we're entering a space of focus, that we're shifting from consumption to transformation, that what comes next matters. So breathe. 4 in, hold, 6 out. Again, 4 in, hold, 6 out. One more time. 4 in, hold, 6 out. Good, you're here. You're present. And you're ready. The first thing we need to understand about the invisible grind is that visibility itself is a trap. Not just sometimes. Not just for some people. For almost everyone, in almost every situation, visibility is a trap. And the reason is simple. When people can see what you're doing, you start optimizing for what looks good rather than what works. You make decisions based on how they'll be perceived rather than how they'll perform. You choose the impressive option over the effective option. And slowly, without realizing it, you drift away from your actual goal and toward a performance of pursuing your goal. Think about the last time you worked on a creative project. If you shared it as you went, how much time did you spend on the parts that would be easy to show? How much did you avoid the messy, technical, unglamorous work because it wouldn't translate well to an update post? This is the visibility tax. Every minute spent making your process presentable is a minute not spent on the process itself. And those minutes add up. Over weeks and months, they add up to hours and days of misdirected effort, all because you were working for an audience instead of working for the outcome. Now compare that to work you've done in complete privacy. No updates, no sharing, just you and the task. In that space, you made different choices. You did things that were ugly but effective. You took shortcuts that worked but wouldn't look impressive. You iterated quickly without worrying about explaining each iteration. You failed without documentation. And in that freedom, you probably moved faster and learned more than you do when you're working visibly. That's not a coincidence. That's the natural result of removing the visibility tax. So the first invisible advantage is speed. When you work in silence, you can move faster because you're not carrying the weight of an audience. You can fail quickly, pivot quickly, test ideas that might not work without the embarrassment of public failure. And that speed compounds. Every day you move faster than someone who's working visibly, you pull a little further ahead. Over months, that gap becomes significant. Over years, it becomes insurmountable. And from the outside, it looks like you just appeared out of nowhere with success. But you know the truth. You know about the silent months, the invisible iterations, the private failures that taught you what worked. The second invisible advantage is clarity. When nobody's watching, you can think clearly about what you actually want rather than what you think you should want. You can be honest with yourself about your motivations, your fears, your strengths and weaknesses, because there's nobody to perform for, nobody to impress, nobody whose expectations you need to manage. It's just you in reality. And in that unfiltered space, you can make much better decisions. You can choose the path that's right for you rather than the path that looks right to others. I remember talking to a friend who was starting a business. She had this idea that she was really excited about, but it wasn't sexy. It wasn't the kind of business that would get featured in startup publications. It was unglamorous. B2B software for a niche industry. She knew it could work. She knew there was a need. But she was hesitant to pursue it because she couldn't figure out how to make it sound impressive. She kept tweaking the idea, trying to add features or angles that would make it more shareable, more fundable, more like the startups she saw getting attention online. And every tweak moved her further from the original idea that actually solved a real problem. I asked her a simple question. If nobody ever knew you built this, if you couldn't tell anyone or post about it or put it on your LinkedIn, would you still want to build it? She paused, and then she said yes, because the original idea, the unglamorous one, was actually meaningful to her. It solved a problem she'd experienced personally. It helped people she cared about. But she'd been willing to abandon it because it didn't fit the narrative of what a successful founder was supposed to look like. The visibility trap had almost cost her the business before she even started. So she made a different choice. She decided to build in silence. For 6 months, she didn't tell anyone except her co-founder. No social media updates, no startup events, no investor meetings, just building. And in that silence, she built something that actually worked, something that people actually needed. And when she finally went public, when she had customers and revenue and proof, the story told itself. She didn't need to make it impressive because the results were impressive. The work had spoken for itself. That's the clarity advantage. When you remove the pressure to make your work impressive before it's finished, you can focus on making it good. And good work, given enough time, becomes impressive on its own. You don't need to force it. You don't need to spin it. You just need to do it. In silence. Until it's undeniable. The third invisible advantage is resilience. When you work in silence, criticism can't reach you. Doubt can't find you. The voices that tell you it's impossible or you're not good enough or you should quit, those voices require an audience. They need visibility to exist. But in the dark, in your pre-dawn hours or your late-night sessions, those voices have no power. It's just you and the work. And the work doesn't judge you. It doesn't tell you you're not ready. It just responds to effort. You put in the work, you get the result. Direct, honest, clean. This resilience compounds too. Every day you work in silence and make progress. You build evidence that you don't need external validation to move forward. You prove to yourself that you can do hard things alone. And that proof? The first metric is consistency. Are you showing up? Not occasionally. Not when you feel inspired. Every day. Or every weekday if that's your commitment. Are you protecting your sacred window and using it for the work? If the answer is yes, you're winning. Because consistency is the foundation of everything else. You can have the perfect strategy and the best resources and the most natural talent, but if you're not showing up consistently, none of it matters. And showing up in silence, when there's no one to impress and no one to disappoint except yourself, that's the hardest kind of showing up. So if you're doing it, you're already ahead of most people. The second metric is depth. Are you going deep, or are you just going through the motions? When you're working in your sacred window, are you fully present? Are you engaging with the hard parts of the work? The parts that require real concentration and effort? Or are you skimming the surface, doing the easy tasks that make you feel productive without actually challenging you? Depth is uncomfortable. It requires you to push past the point where work feels easy and into the territory where it feels impossible. But that's where growth happens. That's where you develop skills that create asymmetric advantages. So measure depth. Be honest with yourself. Are you going deep, or are you just showing up? The third metric is output. Are you producing? Not just thinking, not just planning, not just learning. Are you creating tangible things? Words written, code shipped, designs completed, miles run, weight lifted. Whatever your work is, are you generating output? Because thinking and planning and learning are important, but they're not sufficient. At some point you have to produce. And in the silence, where there's no one to witness your process, output is the only proof that matters. So track it. Keep a private log. Every day, write down what you produced in your sacred window and watch that log grow. Watch the evidence accumulate. That's your proof. That's how you know you're winning. But here's the challenge with invisible progress. It doesn't feel like progress. Not in the way visible progress does. When you post an update and people congratulate you, you get an immediate dopamine hit. You feel validated. You feel like you're moving forward. But when you work in silence, you don't get that hit. You finish your morning session, and then you go about your day, and nobody knows what you did. Nobody comments. Nobody celebrates. It's just you and your private log, and that can feel empty, especially in the beginning. Especially when you're used to external validation. This is where most people break. They can't tolerate the emptiness. They need the feedback loop. So they post something, share an update, get a few likes, and it feels good for a moment. But then they've broken the silence. They've invited the world into their process, and now they're working for an audience again, and the invisible advantage starts to erode. So you have to learn to tolerate the emptiness, to find satisfaction in the work itself, not in the recognition of the work. And that's a skill. It's not natural. It has to be practiced, deliberately, every single day. Here's how you practice it. Every time you finish a work session, before you do anything else, you pause. You sit for a moment and acknowledge what you just did, not out loud, not in a post, just internally. You say to yourself, I showed up. I went deep. I produced output. I'm building something that matters. And nobody needs to know about it except me. You let that sink in. You let yourself feel satisfied with the private progress. And then you move on with your day. You don't post about it. You don't tell anyone. You just carry it with you. A secret source of confidence that nobody else can touch. Do that every day, and something interesting happens. Over time, you start to prefer the private satisfaction over the public validation. You start to notice that the comments and likes don't feel as meaningful as they used to. They're nice, but they're not necessary, because you have something better. You have the deep bone-level knowledge that you're capable of doing hard things when nobody's watching. And that knowledge, once you have it, once it's really yours, is more valuable than any amount of external validation, because it can't be taken away. It doesn't depend on algorithms or engagement or anyone else's attention. It's yours, forever. That's the psychological transformation at the heart of the invisible grind. You stop being dependent on external validation. You develop an internal engine, and once that engine is running, you become unstoppable, because you don't need anyone's permission to keep going. You don't need encouragement or support or cheerleading. You just need the work. And the work is always there, waiting for you, in the silence, in the sacred window, every single morning. Now let's talk about the obstacles you're going to face, because they're coming. The invisible grind sounds good in theory, but in practice it's hard, really hard, and there are specific obstacles that almost everyone encounters. So we're going to name them, because if you know what's coming, you can prepare for it. And if you can prepare for it, you can get through it without breaking the silence. The first obstacle is loneliness. Working in silence is lonely. There's no way around that. You're waking up when everyone else is asleep. You're working when everyone else is scrolling. You're grinding when everyone else is relaxing. And you can't even talk about it, because talking about it breaks the silence. So you're alone with your work. And at first, that feels noble. It feels like sacrifice. But after a few weeks or months, it just feels lonely. You start to crave connection. You start to wonder if anyone would care about what you're building. You start to fantasize about sharing an update, just to feel connected to other people. And that's the trap. That's loneliness trying to pull you out of the silent grind. Here's how you handle it. You acknowledge the loneliness. You don't fight it or pretend it's not there. You say to yourself, this is lonely. Working in silence is lonely, and that's okay. Loneliness is the price of the invisible advantage. You accept it, and then you keep working, because loneliness is temporary. The foundation you're building is permanent. And when you finally do emerge, when you finally do share what you've built, you won't be lonely anymore. You'll have something to connect over, something real. Not just intentions and announcements, but actual results. And that connection, based on results rather than process, is deeper and more satisfying than anything you'd get from updates along the way. The second obstacle is doubt. When nobody's watching, when nobody's encouraging you, when nobody even knows what you're doing, doubt creeps in. Is this even working? Am I wasting my time? Should I be doing something else? Is this worth it? The doubt is relentless. It attacks you in the morning when you're trying to start. It attacks you in the middle of a session when the work gets hard. It attacks you at night when you're reviewing what you did and it doesn't feel like enough. Doubt is the enemy of the invisible grind, and you have to learn to fight it. Here's how you fight it. You keep evidence. Remember that private log I mentioned? That's your weapon against doubt. Every day, you write down what you produced, and every week you review that log. You see the accumulation, the words written, the code shipped, the progress made, and that evidence is irrefutable. It's not someone else's opinion. It's not a feeling. It's fact, and facts defeat doubt. So when doubt shows up, which it will, you pull out your log, you review the evidence, and you remind yourself that you're not guessing. You're not hoping. You're actually making progress. Measurable, tangible progress. And then you keep going. The third obstacle is comparison. Even when you're working in silence, you still see other people's visible progress. You see their launches and their wins and their celebrations, and you can't help but compare. They're out there building in public, getting attention, growing audiences. And you're here in the dark, alone, with nobody watching. And it's easy to think you're doing it wrong. It's easy to think maybe you should go public too. Maybe you're missing out. Maybe the silent grind is just an excuse to hide. This is comparison trying to break your silence. Trying to pull you into the performance. Here's how you handle it. You remember the Marcus and Sarah story. You remember that visible progress often comes at the cost of actual progress. You remember that the people you're comparing yourself to are paying the visibility tax. They're spending time and energy managing their public persona that you're spending on the work itself. And over time, your silent progress is going to compound into something they can't match because they've been optimizing for the wrong metric. So when comparison shows up, you remind yourself, I'm not hiding. I'm building. And there's a difference, a crucial difference. And I'm willing to be patient enough to see the payoff. The fourth obstacle is the urge to share wins. This is the trickiest one, because wins feel good. And when something good happens in your silent work, when you have a breakthrough or a milestone or a moment of success, your first instinct is to share it, to tell someone, to post about it, to get a little celebration. And that instinct is natural. But it's also the moment where most people break their silence, because one shared win leads to two leads to 10. And before you know it, you're working visibly again. The invisible advantage is gone. Here's how you handle it. You share wins with your future self. When you hit a milestone, you write it down. In detail, what you did, how it felt, what it mean. And sure enough, around minute 7 or 8, something shifts. The resistance fades. The task clicks into focus. Your hands start moving faster. Your thoughts start connecting. You're not fighting the work anymore. You're in it. You're flowing. And for the next hour, you're completely absorbed. Time disappears. The doubt disappears. There's only you and the work. And when you finally surface, when you check the clock and realize 90 minutes have passed, you've done something real, something substantial, something that moved you forward. And nobody knows. Nobody saw. Nobody congratulated you. But you know, and that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. You close your computer. You stand up. You stretch. And you carry this moment with you into the rest of your day. This private victory. This proof that you can do hard things alone. And throughout the day, when things get chaotic, when people make demands, when the visible world tries to pull you in every direction, you'll have this anchor, this secret source of confidence, this knowledge that before anyone else was awake, you were building. And that makes everything else easier, because you've already won. Before the day even started, you already won, and nobody needs to know but you. That's what the invisible grind feels like in practice. It's not glamorous. It's not inspiring in the way a motivational video is inspiring. But it's real, it's sustainable, and it works, because it's built on the foundation of private commitment rather than public performance. And private commitment over time creates results that public performance can only fake. So you keep doing it, day after day, morning after morning, building in silence, accumulating wins nobody sees, until one day the accumulation is so substantial that it can't stay invisible anymore. And that's when you emerge, not before. Not when people ask what you're working on. Not when you hit a small milestone, when the work is undeniable, when you have results, not just progress, when you can show rather than tell. That's when the silence breaks. And not a moment before. Let's talk about rejection now, because the invisible grind doesn't protect you from rejection. It just changes when and how rejection happens. When you work visibly, rejection comes as criticism, as people questioning your decisions or doubting your abilities or telling you to give up. But when you work invisibly, rejection comes later. It comes when you finally put your work into the world, when you launch or ship or share what you've built in silence, and the world says no, or worse, the world says nothing. You've put in 6 months or a year or 2 years of silent work, and when you finally reveal it, nobody cares. That's invisible rejection. And it's brutal, because you can't prepare for it by getting feedback along the way. You just have to face it all at once. So how do you handle invisible rejection? How do you put your work out there after all that silent effort and have it be met with indifference or criticism or outright rejection without completely falling apart? The answer is that you collect rejection as data, not as judgment. You treat every no as information, every piece of criticism as a clue about what to improve, every moment of indifference as a signal that you haven't found product-market fit yet. This is hard. This requires emotional discipline, because rejection feels personal. It feels like the world is telling you that you wasted your time, that all those silent mornings were for nothing. But that's not what rejection is saying. Rejection is just saying that this version, this iteration didn't work. And that's okay, because you're going to iterate again. You're going to take the feedback, go back into the silence, and build the next version. And you're going to keep doing that until you get a yes, however long it takes. The key is to build a rejection vault. A private document where you log every rejection, every criticism, every piece of negative feedback. And next to each entry, you write what you learned from it, what it's teaching you about your work, what you need to change or improve. You don't wallow in the rejection. You don't internalize it as proof that you're not good enough. You just extract the data and move on. And over time, your rejection vault becomes one of your most valuable assets, because it shows you patterns. It shows you where you're consistently missing the mark. It shows you what you need to focus on in your next silent iteration. And it also shows you how far you've come, how many rejections you've survived, how much you've learned, how much more resilient you've become. I want to be clear about something. The invisible grind is not about avoiding rejection. It's about preparing for rejection in a way that doesn't derail you. When you work visibly and get rejected early, before you've built anything substantial, that rejection can stop you. It can convince you to quit before you've really tried. But when you work invisibly, when you've put in months of silent effort, when you have evidence of your own capability, rejection can't stop you the same way. It still hurts. It's still disappointing, but it doesn't break you, because you know what you're capable of. You've proven it to yourself in the dark. And if this version didn't work, you'll build another one, and another one, and another one, until something works, because that's what people who win do. They collect rejections until they get an acceptance. And the silent grind gives you the resilience to keep collecting. Let me tell you about rejection in my own journey. There was a period where I was working on something in complete silence. For 8 months, I didn't tell anyone. I just worked. Early mornings, late nights, weekends. I built something I thought was valuable, something I thought people needed. And when I finally shared it, the response was nothing. Not negative. Just nothing. A few polite comments. No traction. No excitement. Just indifference. And I remember sitting there thinking, I wasted 8 months. Like all that silent work was for nothing because the market didn't respond the way I hoped. But then I looked at my rejection vault. I looked at what people weren't saying, and I realized they weren't rejecting the core idea. They just didn't understand how to use it. The positioning was wrong. The explanation was unclear. The packaging was off. The foundation was solid, but the presentation was broken. And that was fixable. So I went back into the silence. I took everything I'd learned from the non-response, and I rebuilt the presentation. The core stayed the same, but how I explained it, how I positioned it, how I packaged it, all of that changed. And when I shared it again, 3 months later, it worked. People got it. People wanted it. People shared it, not because the work was different, because the presentation was different. And I only knew how to fix the presentation because I treated that first rejection as data instead of judgment. That's the pattern. Build in silence, launch, collect feedback. Go back into silence, iterate, launch again. Collect feedback, iterate. You do this until you win. And you can do this because the silent grind has made you resilient. It's taught you to derive satisfaction from the work itself, not from external validation. So rejection doesn't devastate you. It just informs your next iteration. And each iteration gets you closer to the version that works, the version that can't be ignored, the version that finally gets the yes you've been working toward. Now let's talk about unsexy skills. This is one of the most important concepts in the invisible grind. When you're working visibly, you're incentivized to work on skills that look impressive, skills that are easy to demonstrate, skills that translate well to content. But when you're working invisibly, you can focus on unsexy skills. Skills that don't look impressive but create asymmetric advantages. Skills that nobody notices until you apply them, and suddenly you're operating at a level that seems impossible. These are the skills that separate people who seem to magically succeed from everyone else. And you can only develop them in silence because they're too boring, too technical, too unglamorous to share along the way. What are unsexy skills? They're things like deeply understanding your customer's actual workflow, not the workflow you think they have. They're things like mastering the technical details of your craft that nobody sees but everyone benefits from. They're things like developing systems and processes that make you efficient in ways that aren't visible from the outside. They're the fundamentals, the foundations, the unglamorous repetitive practice that builds true expertise. And they take time, lots of time, which is why most people skip them, because it's boring to practice fundamentals when you could be building something visible. But that's the mistake. The fundamentals are what make the visible work possible. And the invisible grind gives you the space to master fundamentals without the pressure to be impressive. Think about a musician. The visible work is the performance, the concert, the recording. That's what people see and celebrate. But the invisible work is the hours of scales, the technique drills, the music theory, the ear training, all the boring, repetitive practice that nobody wants to watch but that makes the visible performance possible. And the best musicians spend way more time on the invisible work than the visible work, because they understand that the invisible work is what creates the capacity for excellence. The same principle applies to anything you're building. The visible work is what people see, but the invisible work is what makes it possible. So what are your unsexy skills? What are the fundamentals of your craft that you need to master but can't make into good content? Now let's address the elephant in the room, the question you've probably been asking this whole time. When do you go public? When do you break the silence? When do you emerge from the invisible grind and show the world what you've built? Because you can't stay invisible forever. At some point, the work needs to be shared. The product needs to be launched. The art needs to be shown. So when? How do you know? There are 3 signals that indicate you're ready to emerge. The first signal is results, not progress. Results. You've built something that works, something that creates value, something that solves a problem or fulfills a need or delivers on a promise. It's not perfect. It never will be perfect. But it's real. It's functional. It's ready. You're not emerging with an idea or a plan or a prototype. You're emerging with results. And that distinction is crucial. Because when you emerge with results, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. You just show them. And the results speak for themselves. The second signal is readiness. Not confidence, readiness. You've prepared everything you need to support the public launch. Your systems are in place. Your processes are tested. You have the capacity to handle success if it comes. You're not hoping success comes. You're ready for it to come. And that readiness is the result of all the invisible work, the unsexy skills, the 1% gains, the silent iterations. You've built a foundation that can support a visible structure. And you know it. Not because you're arrogant, but because you've tested it in private. You've proven it to yourself. And now you're ready to prove it to others. The third signal is emotional detachment. Not indifference, detachment. You care about the work. You care about the outcome. But you're not emotionally dependent on external validation. You've done the work in silence for so long that you've developed an internal source of satisfaction. You know what you've built. You know what you're capable of. And whether the world celebrates you or ignores you doesn't change those facts. You're emerging because the work is ready, not because you need the validation. And that detachment gives you resilience. Because if the first launch doesn't work, if the first emergence doesn't get the response you hoped, you won't fall apart. You'll just go back into the silence, iterate, and emerge again. Because you're not performing, you're building. And builders iterate until they get it right. When all 3 signals are present, results, readiness, and detachment, that's when you emerge. Not before. And not because someone told you to. Not because you hit an arbitrary timeline. Not because you're tired of being invisible. Because the work is ready. Because you're ready. Because the emergence serves the mission rather than serving your need for validation. That's the standard, and it's a high standard. Which is why most people never get there. They emerge too early. They break the silence before they have results. And then they wonder why their launch fell flat. Why nobody cared. Why the work didn't speak for itself. And the answer is always the same. They emerged too early. They didn't stay in the silence long enough to build something undeniable. But you're going to be different. You're going to stay in the silence. You're going to keep grinding when nobody's watching. You're going to build results, develop readiness, and cultivate detachment. And when you finally do emerge, it won't be a question of whether people will care. They won't be able to ignore you because you'll have something real, something substantial, something that proves itself. And that's the ultimate goal of the invisible grind, not to stay invisible forever, but to stay invisible long enough that when you do become visible, it's because your work demands it, not because you demand it. Let's do a visualization together. Close your eyes if you can. Take a deep breath. Imagine yourself 6 months from now. It's early morning, same time you've been waking up all these months. But today feels different, because today you're ready. You've been working in silence for half a year. Nobody knows what you've been building. But you've felt the daily 1% gains. You've collected the rejections and learned from them. You've mastered the unsexy skills. You've built something real. And today, you're going to share it. You're going to emerge from the silence. You sit at your computer. You pull up what you've built. And you look at it. Really look at it. 6 months ago, this didn't exist. 6 months ago, this was just an idea, a hope, a commitment you made to yourself in the dark. And now it's real. It's finished. It's ready. You feel proud. Not the shallow pride that comes from likes and comments. The deep pride that comes from honoring a private commitment. You did what you said you'd do. When nobody was watching. When nobody was encouraging. When nobody even knew. You showed up. Every day. And you built something. Now you're about to share it. You write your post. Or send your email. Or launch your product. Whatever emergence looks like for you. And as you're about to hit send, you notice something. You're not nervous. Not the way you thought you'd be. Because you're not dependent on the response. You've already won. In the silence. In the sacred mornings. In the invisible grind that got you here. The public response is just bonus. It's not the thing. The thing already happened. In private. And nobody can take that away from you. So you hit send. And you release your work into the world. And whatever happens next, you know you're ready for it. Because you've been preparing. In silence. For 6 months. And that preparation. That invisible foundation. That's what makes you bulletproof. Open your eyes. That's where you're headed. That's the destination. Not the public success. Not the visible wins. The private preparation that makes public success inevitable. And you're going to get there. One morning at a time. One 1% gain at a time. One silent day at a time. Until the accumulation is so substantial that emergence isn't a choice anymore. It's just the natural next step. And when that happens, when you finally do go public, you'll understand what the invisible grind was really about. It wasn't about hiding. It wasn't about avoiding criticism or staying safe. It was about building a foundation so solid that nothing could shake it. And that foundation, once you have it, once it's really yours, changes everything. Let's talk about what happens after your first emergence. Because emergence isn't a one-time thing. It's a cycle. You build in silence, you emerge with results, and then you go back into silence to build the next thing. This is crucial. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that once they've had public success, they need to stay public. They need to keep posting, keep updating, keep being visible to maintain momentum. But that's wrong. That's how you lose the invisible advantage. After emergence, after the launch, or the win, or the public success, you celebrate briefly, you learn what you can from the response, and then you go back into the silence. You start the next grind. Because sustainable success isn't about one big win. It's about building a system where each win funds the next silent preparation phase, where visibility and invisibility alternate in a rhythm that compounds over time. Think of emergence like a harvest. You plant seeds in silence. You tend them in silence. You watch them grow in silence. And then, when they're ready, you harvest. You go public. You share the results. But after the harvest, you don't just sit there. You plant again, in silence. And the cycle continues. Each harvest a little bigger than the last. Each silent phase a little more effective because you're learning and improving. That's the long-term game. That's how you build something sustainable. Not by being constantly visible. By alternating between focused invisibility and strategic visibility. And always protecting the invisible work. Because that's where the real building happens. So after your first emergence, after you've tasted public success, you'll face a new challenge. The temptation to stay visible. People will know you now. They'll expect updates. They'll ask what you're working on next. And it'll be really tempting to tell them, to keep them engaged, to maintain momentum. But that's the trap. That's visibility pulling you away from the silent grind that made the first success possible. So you have to resist. Politely but firmly. You say, I'm working on something. I'll share it when it's ready. And then you disappear back into the silence. Back into the sacred mornings. Back into the invisible grind. And you do it all again. Build results, develop readiness, cultivate detachment, and emerge when all three signals are present. Not before. This might feel counterintuitive. You might feel like you're losing momentum by going silent again, like you should capitalize on the attention from your first win. But remember, attention is expensive. Managing attention, responding to attention, performing for attention, that all takes energy. Energy you could be spending on building the next thing. So you make a choice. You choose to invest your energy in building rather than in managing attention. And yes, that means some people will forget about you. Some momentum will fade, but that's okay. Because you're not optimizing for continuous visibility. You're optimizing for continuous building. And when you emerge the second time, when you've built something even better than the first thing, those people will come back. And they'll be more impressed than if you'd been visible the whole time. Because once again, you've appeared with results, not progress. With proof, not promises. The cycle of build, emerge, build, emerge, build, emerge. This is the pattern of sustainable success. Now I want to address the critics, the haters, the people who will emerge after your success to tell you why it wasn't deserved or why it won't last, or why you got lucky. Because they will show up. Success makes you visible, and visibility attracts criticism. And if you're not prepared for this, if you haven't bulletproofed your mindset, the haters can derail you. They can make you doubt yourself. They can make you defensive. They can pull you into arguments and debates that drain your energy and distract you from the work. So let's talk about how to handle haters from a position of silent strength. First, remember that haters only show up after you've won. Nobody criticizes invisible work. Nobody hates on someone who's still building in silence. Haters need a target, and that target is your success. So in a weird way, haters are confirmation that you've done something worth noticing. They're validation, not of your worth, but of your results. You built something big enough to attract attention, and some of that attention is negative. That's just how it works. So when haters show up, your first response isn't defensiveness, it's recognition. You think to yourself, okay, I'm successful enough now that I have critics. That's actually a good sign. And you let that thought settle. You don't argue with it. You don't dismiss it. You just acknowledge it. You've reached a new level, and this is the cost of that level. Second, you filter criticism for useful data. Not all criticism is hate. Some of it is feedback disguised as negativity. So you read or listen to the criticism, and you extract anything useful. Is there a valid point buried in the negativity? Is there something you could improve? Is there a blind spot you hadn't noticed? If yes, you take that information. You add it to your rejection vault. You thank the critic silently for pointing it out, and then you move on. But if the criticism is purely emotional, if it's just someone being mean or jealous or resentful, you discard it immediately. You don't engage. You don't defend. You just let it go. Because engaging with emotional criticism is like wrestling a pig. You both get dirty and the pig likes it, so you don't wrestle. You just keep building. Third, you return to your private evidence. Remember all those months of silent work? Remember your log of daily progress? Remember your rejection vault and your 1% gains and all the proof you accumulated in private? That's your armor. When haters show up, when doubt tries to creep back in, you return to your private evidence. You review what you built. You remember the journey. You remind yourself that you didn't get here by luck or accident. You got here through consistent, disciplined, invisible work. And nobody can take that away from you. Nobody's opinion changes the facts of what you accomplished. So you ground yourself in those facts, and you keep moving forward. The haters fade into the background. They always do. Because they don't have anything to offer you. They're not building anything. They're just reacting to your building. And their reaction, positive or negative, doesn't change your trajectory. Only your work changes your trajectory. So you focus on the work. Let me give you a framework for this. When criticism shows up, you run it through a 3-step filter. Step 1. Is this person qualified to give me feedback on this topic? Do they have expertise or experience that's relevant? If no, discard immediately. If yes, move to Step 2. Step 2. Is there actionable feedback in this criticism? Something specific I can improve or change? If no, discard. If yes, extract the feedback, add it to my vault, move to Step 3. Step 3. Am I better off engaging with this person or returning to the work? Almost always the answer is returning to the work. Because engagement is expensive, and the work is what matters. So you thank them for the feedback, if it was useful, and then you disengage. You go back into the silence. You keep building. This framework protects you from wasting energy on critics who don't deserve it. And it ensures that you extract value from criticism when value is present. But most importantly, it keeps you focused on what matters, the work. Because at the end of the day, haters aren't your problem. Haters are a symptom of success. Your only problem is whether you can stay focused on the invisible grind even after you've achieved visible success. And that's hard. Really hard. Because once you've tasted visibility, once you've experienced the high of public celebration, it's tempting to stay there, to keep seeking that high, to keep performing. But that's the trap. That's what breaks the cycle. So you have to be disciplined. You have to remember why you started this journey. Not for the visibility, not for the validation, for the work itself, for the satisfaction of building something that matters. And if you can hold on to that, if you can keep returning to that truth, no amount of criticism will touch you. You'll be bulletproof, not because you're arrogant, but because you're grounded in something deeper than external validation. You're grounded in the work. Let's talk about the final transformation now, the person you become through the invisible grind. Because this journey isn't just about building a product or a business or a skill. It's about building yourself. It's about becoming someone who can do hard things when nobody's watching. Someone who doesn't need permission or validation or encouragement to keep going. Someone who has an internal engine that runs on progress itself. And that transformation, that fundamental shift in who you are, that's the real prize. That's what makes everything else possible. When you start this journey, you're probably dependent on external validation. Most people are. You check your phone for notifications. You post updates and wait for responses. You measure your worth by engagement metrics. That's normal. That's how we're trained in the attention economy. But through the invisible grind, you unlearn that dependence. Slowly. Over months of working in silence. Over hundreds of mornings where nobody validates your effort. Over countless moments of doubt where you keep going anyway. You develop a new source of satisfaction. An internal source. And once you have that, once it's really integrated into who you are, you become unstoppable. Not because you don't care what people think, but because their thoughts don't determine your actions. You determine your actions based on your goals, your values, your commitment to the work. And that autonomy, that self-determination, that's freedom, real freedom. You also become more patient. The invisible grind teaches patience like nothing else. Because you can't rush compound improvement. You can't skip the accumulation phase. You have to put in the time. The silent, repetitive, unglamorous time. And at first, that's frustrating. You want results now. You want visible progress now. But over time, you learn to trust the process. You learn that daily 1% really do compound into exponential growth. You learn that invisible foundations really do support visible structures. And you become willing to wait, to work in the dark for as long as it takes. Because you know the payoff is coming. Not because you're optimistic, because you've seen it work. You've experienced the transformation firsthand. And that makes you patient in a way that gives you an unfair advantage over everyone who's chasing quick wins. You become more resilient too. Because rejection and failure and criticism can't break you anymore. You've learned to collect them as data, to extract the useful information and discard the rest. To keep building regardless of external response. And that resilience means you can take bigger risks. You can try things that might fail. You can experiment without fear, because you know that failure isn't the end. It's just information. It's just one more data point in your rejection vault, and you'll use that data to iterate and try again, and again, and again, until something works. That resilience, that willingness to keep going no matter what. That's what separates people who eventually succeed from people who give up too early. And the invisible grind gives you that resilience, not through motivation or inspiration, through practice, through proof, through the accumulated evidence that you can survive failure and keep building. You become more focused as well. Because the invisible grind eliminates distractions. It strips away everything that doesn't serve the work. The performance, the updates, the engagement, all of it falls away. And what's left is pure focus, just you and the work. And over time, that focus becomes your default state. Even outside your sacred morning hours, even in the visible parts of your life, you carry that focus with you. You're less reactive, less distracted, less pulled in multiple directions. Because you've trained yourself to protect your attention, to guard your energy, to say no to everything that doesn't move you toward your goal. And that focus, that ability to concentrate deeply on what matters, that's one of the scarcest and most valuable skills in the modern world. And you develop it in silence, in the invisible grind, where nobody sees and nobody cares, but where everything that matters is built. Finally, you become more authentic. Because the invisible grind forces you to be honest with yourself. There's no audience to perform for, no persona to maintain, no brand to protect. It's just you, the real you, the you that nobody else sees. And in that space, you have to confront your actual motivations, your actual abilities, Your actual limits. You can't hide behind performance. You can't fake competence. You either do the work or you don't. And that brutal honesty, that confrontation with reality, strips away all the bullshit. All the stories you tell yourself. Here's my suggestion, right now, before you move on to the next thing, before you forget the conviction you feel in this moment. Decide. Decide what your invisible grind is going to be. What are you building in silence? What's the work that matters so much that you're willing to wake up before dawn to do it? What's the foundation you need to build that nobody else can see yet? Get clear on that. Write it down. Make it specific. And then decide when you're going to start. Not eventually. Not someday. When? Tomorrow morning? This weekend? Next Monday? Pick a date. Put it in your calendar and commit. Make a promise to yourself. Not to anyone else. To yourself. That you're going to show up. That you're going to do the invisible work. That you're going to build in silence until you have something undeniable. And then keep that promise. That's the only thing that matters now. Everything else is just words. You started this audiobook in the dark. 4:47 a.m. Everyone else asleep. Just you, and now you're ending it the same way. In the dark, alone, with a choice in front of you. You can go back to working visibly, announcing your goals, sharing your progress, optimizing for likes and comments and engagement. And some people make that work. Or you can choose the invisible grind. The silent mornings, the unsexy skills, the private progress, the long, patient accumulation of wins nobody sees until they can't be ignored. And that choice, that fundamental decision about how you're going to work and who you're going to become, that determines everything. So choose. And if you choose the invisible grind, if you choose to build in silence, know this: you're not alone. There are others out there working in the dark just like you. You'll never see them. You'll never know who they are. But they're there, building foundations, developing skills, making progress. And one day, you'll all emerge. Not together, not coordinated, but one by one. With results that seem impossible. With success that seems to come from nowhere. And the world will celebrate the outcomes. But you'll know the truth. You'll know about the invisible grind, the silent work, the sacred mornings, the proof archive, the rejection vault, the 1% gains, all of it. And that knowledge, that secret, that's yours to keep. Go back into the dark. It's where champions are forged. It's where empires are built. It's where you become someone who can't help but win. Until you win. And then you go back into the dark, and you do it again, and again, and again, in silence. Because that's where the real work happens. That's where transformation occurs. That's where you become the person capable of the success you dream about. The work isn't out here, in the light, in the visible. The work is in there, in the silence, in the invisible. So go, start, build, and don't come back until you have something undeniable, something real, something that proves you can do hard things when nobody's watching. And when you do come back, when you do emerge, remember where you came from. Remember the dark mornings. Remember the silent grind. Because that's not just how you got your first win. That's how you get every win. Forever. In silence. Until you win. Again and again. And again. This is your path now. Walk it alone. In the dark. Until the light finds you because it has to. Because what you built can't stay hidden anymore. Because you've won. And the world is finally catching up to what you've known all along. That you're capable of extraordinary things. When nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. So go watch yourself, go prove it to yourself, and let the rest of the world catch up later, much later, after you've already won, in silence. But let's be real for a moment. Everything I've just told you sounds inspiring. It sounds achievable. And then tomorrow morning comes. Your alarm goes off at 4:47, and you're tired, really tired, and the inspiration from this audiobook feels distant, almost silly, and you think maybe you'll just sleep in today. Just this once. Start fresh tomorrow. And that moment, that specific moment when your alarm goes off and you have to decide, that's where the invisible grind actually lives. Not in the inspiration, in the decision. So let me give you the tools for that moment. The real, practical, unglamorous tools for when motivation is gone and all you have is the decision. First, you need a decision tree for the morning. Not a vague commitment, a literal step-by-step process that removes thinking from the equation. Here's what it looks like. Your alarm goes off. You count backwards from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And on 1, your feet hit the floor. No negotiation. No snooze, no thinking. Just the count and the movement. This is based on a simple principle. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. You don't wait to feel motivated. You move and motivation follows. So you count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, feet on floor. Next step, you stand. You don't sit on the edge of your bed thinking, you stand, fully vertical, because your body position affects your mental state. Lying down is a sleeping position, sitting is a thinking position, standing is a doing position. So you stand, and once you're standing, you walk. You don't decide where to walk. You already decided that last night. You walk to your workspace, to your desk, to your gym, to wherever your invisible work happens, and you walk there before your brain fully wakes up, before the negotiation can start, before doubt can organize its arguments. You just walk, and by the time your brain catches up, you're already at your workspace, already in position, already starting, and starting is 90% of the battle. But what about the mornings when this doesn't work? When you count down and your feet still don't hit the floor? When the negotiation wins? Because it will happen. You're human. There will be mornings when you fail the first test. So let's talk about the recovery protocol. Because how you handle the first failure determines whether you have one bad morning or a complete relapse. Here's what you don't do. You don't spiral. You don't tell yourself you've blown it. You don't decide that because you missed one morning, the whole thing is over. That's the thinking that kills the invisible grind. Instead, you activate the recovery protocol. The recovery protocol has 3 steps. First, you acknowledge the failure without judgment. You say out loud, I didn't get up this morning. That's a fact. Not, I'm a failure. Not, I'll never be disciplined. Just the fact. You didn't get up. Okay. Second, you identify the specific obstacle that won you over. Was it that you went to bed too late? Was it that you didn't prepare your workspace last night? Was it that you're fighting a cold? Be specific, because vague problems have vague solutions, and vague solutions don't work. Third, you create a micro-adjustment for tomorrow, not a complete overhaul of your system. A micro-adjustment. If you went to bed too late, you set a bedtime alarm for tonight. If you didn't prepare your workspace, you prepare it right now. If you're fighting a cold, you adjust your wake-up time by 30 minutes to get more sleep. One small change. That's it. And then you move on. You don't dwell. You don't punish yourself. You just adjust and continue. This is crucial. The invisible grind isn't about perfection. It's about recovery speed. Elite performers don't avoid failure. They recover from failure faster than everyone else. So you're training recovery speed. You miss a morning. You recover within hours, not days. You have a bad session. You recover by the next session, not the next week. And over time, your recovery speed becomes your superpower, because everyone fails. Everyone has bad days, but most people let one bad day become 3 bad days, become a week, become a month. They lose momentum, they quit. But you don't, because you have a recovery protocol, and you execute it automatically, without emotion, without drama. Just recover and continue. Now let's talk about the 30-day danger zone, because there's a specific pattern that almost everyone experiences around day 30 of the invisible grind. You've been showing up. You've been doing the work. You've built some momentum. And then, around day 30, something shifts. The newness is gone. The inspiration has faded. The work feels routine, boring, and you start to wonder if it's worth it. This is the 30-day danger zone, and it kills more invisible grinds than anything else. Because at 30 days, you've done enough work to feel like you should be seeing results, but you haven't done enough work to actually see results. You're in the gap, the messy middle. And the gap is where most people quit. Here's how you survive the 30-day danger zone. You expect it. You mark it on your calendar. Day 30, danger zone. And when it arrives, when you feel that shift from excitement to drudgery, you don't panic. You recognize it. You say to yourself, right on schedule, this is the 30-day danger zone. Everyone goes through this, and I'm going to push through it just like everyone who succeeds does. That recognition alone changes everything, because now it's not personal. It's not a sign that you're not cut out for this. It's just a phase, a predictable phase, and phases pass. So you show up on day 30, and day 31, and day 32, even though it feels pointless, even though the work feels heavy, even though you'd rather do anything else, you show up. Because on the other side of the 30-day danger zone is day 40, and day 40 feels different. The routine has become a habit. The habit has become part of your identity, and you're not fighting anymore. You're just doing. But you only get to day 40 if you push through day 30. So you push. Let me give you a specific script for day 30. Days 41 through 60, the depth phase. Now you're ready to go deeper. You've built the showing up habit. Now you build the quality habit. This is where you start focusing on depth, on really pushing during your sessions, on engaging with the hard parts of the work, Unlearning the unsexy skills we talked about earlier, your sessions should feel more challenging now. Not because you're doing more, because you're doing better. Your micro-challenge for days 41 through 60, identify one unsexy skill and dedicate 20 minutes of each session to it. Just 20 minutes. The rest of your session can be normal work. But those 20 minutes? That's skill building time. That's where you develop the capabilities that will create asymmetric advantages later. Do this for 20 days straight. By day 60, you'll have logged over 6 hours on an unsexy skill. And that's enough to see real improvement. Days 61 through 70, the temptation phase. Here's what happens around day 60. You've been grinding for 2 months. You've built something real, and the urge to share it becomes almost unbearable. You want to post about it. You want validation. You want someone to know what you've been doing. This is the temptation phase, and it's dangerous because you're close. You're so close to the 90-day mark. But breaking silence now, before you hit that milestone, it resets everything. So your challenge is to resist, to sit with the urge to share, to acknowledge it without acting on it. Your micro-challenge for days 61 through 70, every time you want to share, write about it instead. In your proof archive, in your private log. Get the sharing urge out through writing, but keep it private. And remind yourself, you're at day 60. 30 days left. You can share at day 90 if you want, but not before. Days 71 through 80, the grind phase. This is the hardest phase. Not because the work is harder, but because there's no novelty left. No breakthrough, no finish line in sight yet. You're just grinding, day after day, showing up, doing the work, in silence, with no recognition, no celebration, no external reward. This is where you prove you're serious, where you separate yourself from everyone who's motivated by external validation. Your challenge is to find joy in the work itself, to look for the moments of flow, the moments of discovery, the moments when the work feels good not because someone noticed, but because it's good work. Your micro-challenge for days 71 through 80, start each session by stating one thing you're curious about in your work today. Not one thing you want to accomplish, one thing you're curious about, and let that curiosity pull you into the session. Make the work interesting to yourself, because nobody else is going to make it interesting for you. Days 81 through 90, the finish phase. You're in the home stretch. You can see day 90. You can feel it, and that creates two possible outcomes. Either you push harder, excited to finish, or you relax, confident you'll make it, and you accidentally quit on day 87. Don't be the second person. Your challenge is to finish strong, to make day 90 mean something. Your micro-challenge for days 81 through 90. Plan your day 90 review. You're going to do a comprehensive review of your entire 90 days, your evidence log, your proof archive, your growth, and you're going to write it all down. What you built, what you learned, who you became. And on day 90, you're going to read that review, and you're going to feel something that most people never feel. The deep, unshakable satisfaction of honoring a 90-day commitment to yourself in complete silence. And that feeling, that proof that you can do what you say you'll do when nobody's watching, that's worth more than any amount of public celebration. So finish, strong, all the way to day 90. After day 90, you make a decision. Do you emerge, or do you go another 90 days? And the answer depends on whether you have results, readiness, and detachment. If you have all three, you can emerge. If not, you keep building. But here's the beautiful thing. By day 90, you won't need me to tell you which choice to make. You'll know, because you'll have developed judgment. You'll have evidence. You'll have self-knowledge. And you'll make the right call for your situation. So I'm not going to tell you what to do after day 90. I'm just going to tell you to get there. Because once you get there, you'll be a different person. The person who can make that decision clearly. Now let's talk about relapse. Because even if you make it through 90 days, even if you build a strong habit, there will be a moment when you break it. Maybe it's an emergency. Maybe it's illness. Maybe it's just exhaustion. Something will happen that interrupts your streak. And the question is, what happens next? Do you use the break as an excuse to quit? Or do you use it as an opportunity to prove your resilience? Most people use it as an excuse. They tell themselves, well, I broke the streak. Might as well quit. I'll start over next month. And next month never comes. So we need a relapse-proofing plan. A specific, detailed plan for what to do when you break your streak. Here's the plan. First, you give yourself a 48-hour window. When you break your streak, you have 48 hours to get back on track. Not next week. Not next month. 48 hours. Why 48 hours? Because that's long enough to handle an emergency or recover from illness, but short enough that you don't lose momentum. If you wait longer than 48 hours, your brain starts to forget the habit. The neural pathway weakens, and restarting becomes much harder. So 48 hours, that's your window. Set a timer if you need to. Mark it on your calendar. But know that at the end of those 48 hours, you're back at your workspace. No negotiation. Second, you do a shorter session for your restart. Don't try to do a full 2-hour session after a break. You'll fail, and failing on your restart kills momentum. Instead, commit to 30 minutes. Just 30 minutes. It's achievable. You can do 30 minutes no matter how tired or unprepared you feel. And once you do those 30 minutes, you've restarted your streak. You're back in. And tomorrow you can do 45 minutes. And the day after, 60. And within a week, you're back to your normal session length. But it starts with 30 manageable minutes. Don't try to be a hero. Just get back in. Third, you update your system. The break happened for a reason. Maybe your wake-up time was unrealistic. Maybe you weren't preparing your workspace properly. Maybe you needed a rest day built into your schedule. Whatever caused the break, you need to address it. Not by abandoning the system, by adjusting it, by making it more sustainable. So you review what happened, you identify the specific failure point, and you make one small change to prevent it from happening again. Maybe you add a rest day every 10th day. Maybe you adjust your wake-up time by 20 minutes. Maybe you create a better night before checklist. One small change. That's it. And then you continue with the adjusted system. This is how you build anti-fragility. Every break makes your system stronger, not weaker. But only if you treat breaks as data rather than as evidence that you're not cut out for this. Let me give you a specific example of relapse recovery. I had a friend, let's call her Maya. Maya was 73 days into her invisible grind, writing every morning, building a manuscript in silence. And then her father had a heart attack. She flew across the country, spent 2 weeks at the hospital, and didn't write once. When she came back, she felt like she'd failed. 73 days gone, streak broken, and she was tempted to quit, to tell herself it wasn't meant to be. But instead, she used the recovery protocol. She gave herself 48 hours to settle back into her normal life. And then, 48 hours after getting home, she woke up at her normal time. She sat at her desk, and she wrote for 30 minutes. Not her normal 90, just 30. And it felt terrible. The words didn't flow. The rhythm was gone. But she did it. And the next day, she did 40 minutes. And the day after, 60. And within a week, she was back to 90-minute sessions. By day 90 of her original commitment, she'd only missed 14 days. And those 14 days didn't invalidate the 73 that came before. They were just a pause, a break. And she came back stronger, because she'd proven to herself that she could handle interruption and still continue. That's anti-fragility. That's relapse proofing. Now let's talk about the social pressure phase. Because at some point, probably around month 3 or 4, if you're really committed to the invisible grind, people are going to notice something's different about you. You're waking up early. You're unavailable at certain times. You're turning down invitations, and they're going to ask questions. What are you working on? Why are you so busy? What's the big secret? And these questions, innocent as they seem, are dangerous, because they're inviting you to break the silence. They're giving you permission to perform, and if you're not careful, you'll take that permission. You'll share, and the invisible advantage starts to erode, so you need a social script, a prepared response that satisfies curiosity without breaking your silence. Here's what it looks like. When someone asks what you're working on, you say, "I'm working on a project. I'll share it when it's ready, but I appreciate you asking." That's it. You don't apologize. You don't over-explain. You don't tease. You just state the fact. You're working on something. You'll share it when it's ready, and then you change the subject. But here's where it gets tricky. What about close relationships? What about your partner or your best friend or your family? Surely you can tell them, right? They'll support you. They'll respect your process, maybe, but maybe not. Because even the people who love you most can inadvertently sabotage your invisible grind. Not maliciously, just through well-meaning check-ins, just through casual questions about how it's going, just through their own anxiety about whether you're okay or whether you're doing too much. And every check-in, every question, every moment of concern pulls your focus away from the work and onto managing their emotions about your work. So even with close relationships, you need boundaries. Here's what I recommend. Early in your invisible grind, maybe on day 3 or 4, you have one conversation with the people closest to you. One conversation where you explain what you're doing and what you need. You tell them, "I'm starting a 90-day project. I'm going to be waking up early to work on something that matters to me. I'm not going to talk about it until it's done. It's not that I don't trust you. It's that I work better in silence.
And I need you to trust that I know what I need.
So if you notice me being quieter or busier or less available, that's why. It's not personal. It's just me focusing. And I'd really appreciate it if you could support me by not asking about it. I'll share everything when I'm ready. And then you have that conversation just once. You don't revisit it. You don't bring it up again. You just do the work. And if they ask about it later, you gently remind them, remember our conversation? I'm still working on it. I'll share when it's ready. And you redirect. Most people who love you will respect this. They might not understand it. They might worry, but they'll respect it. And their respect will become one of your greatest assets. Because it's hard to protect silence alone. It's much easier when the people around you are protecting it with you, even if they don't fully understand why. So have that conversation, set that boundary, and then trust that the people who matter will honor it. Now let's talk about the comparison spiral. Because social media exists, and even when you're working in silence, you're still seeing other people's visible work. You're still scrolling. You're still witnessing launches and celebrations and wins. And comparison is inevitable. You see someone launching the thing you're still building. You see someone getting recognition for work that doesn't look as good as yours. You see someone who started after you but seems further ahead. And comparison whispers, maybe you're doing it wrong. Maybe silence is just an excuse. Maybe you should be visible too. This is the comparison spiral, and it can kill your invisible grind if you don't have a system for handling it. Here's the system. First, you limit exposure. You don't go on social media during your sacred morning window, ever. Your morning hours are for building, not consuming. So you block the sites. You delete the apps from your phone. You create friction between you and the comparison trigger. Because comparison is strongest when your guard is down, when you're tired or uncertain or doubting yourself. And those moments happen most often when you're trying to work. So you protect your work time absolutely. No social media, no comparison, just work. Second, when you do engage with social media, when you're scrolling in the evening or on a break, you practice active reframing. Every time you see someone's win and feel that pang of comparison, you deliberately reframe it. You say to yourself, that person's timeline is not my timeline. Their wins don't diminish my progress. Their visibility doesn't invalidate my silence. They're playing a different game with different rules. I'm playing my game, and my game is working. You say this consciously, out loud if possible, because the reframe has to be active and deliberate. Passive thoughts don't override comparison. Active reframes do. Third, you use comparison as market research, not personal judgment. When you see someone launching successfully, instead of spiraling into, I'm so far behind, you analyze their launch. What did they do well? What could they have done better? What can you learn for when your time comes? You treat their win as data, as education, as a case study, not as evidence that you're inadequate. This shift from emotional comparison to analytical observation changes everything. Because now you're not threatened by other people's success. You're learning from it. You're using it. And that transforms comparison from a liability into an asset. But what about when comparison wins? When you spiral despite your systems? When you have a day where you see someone's launch and it just breaks you? When you think, what am I even doing? Nobody's going to care when I launch. I'm wasting my time. What then? Here's your emergency comparison protocol. You close social media immediately. You don't engage further. You don't scroll more hoping to feel better. You just close it. Then you open your proof archive. You review your evidence. You read your logs from the past week. You look at what you've built, and you remind yourself of a crucial truth. You're not behind. You're invisible. And invisible isn't the same as behind. Invisible is strategic. It's intentional. It's powerful. You're exactly where you chose to be. And when your time comes, when you emerge with results instead of promises, you'll understand why the silence was worth it. So you close social media. You open your proof. You remember your strategy. And you keep building. Let me give you a day-by-day micro-challenge specifically for handling comparison. For the next 7 days, every time you feel comparison, you're going to do 3 things. First, name it. Say out loud or write down, I'm feeling comparison right now. Just name it. Acknowledgement reduces its power. Second, identify the specific trigger. What exactly made you feel compared? Was it their follower count? Their launch announcement? Their apparent ease? Be specific. Third, extract one useful insight. What can you learn from what you just saw? Not about yourself, about the market, about positioning, about tactics. One useful insight. And then you write it down in your proof archive under a section called Market Research. By the end of 7 days, you'll have 7 insights you wouldn't have had if you just spiraled. You'll have transformed comparison into intelligence, and that's a skill that will serve you for life. Now let's talk about energy management, because the invisible grind isn't just about time management. It's about energy management. You can wake up at 4:47 every morning, but if you're exhausted, if your mind is foggy, if you're running on empty, the early wake-up doesn't matter. You'll sit at your desk and accomplish nothing. So we need to talk about how to protect and replenish your energy, how to sustain the grind for months, not just weeks, how to build a system that's marathon ready, not just sprint ready. First, sleep is non-negotiable. If you're waking up at 5 a.m., you need to be asleep by 9:30 p.m. at the latest. Maybe 10 if you can function on 6.5 hours. But you need real sleep. Not lying in bed scrolling, not watching TV with your eyes half closed. Real restorative sleep. So you build a sleep routine. 90 minutes before your target bedtime, you start winding down. Screens off. Lights dimmed. Maybe a book. Maybe a journal. Maybe just sitting in the quiet. And you protect this routine as fiercely as you protect your morning routine. Because the morning routine only works if the sleep routine works. They're a system. And you can't neglect half the system and expect the other half to carry you. Second, nutrition matters. You can't fuel deep work on sugar and caffeine alone. You need real food, protein, healthy fats, complex carbs. Your brain requires specific nutrients to function at its best. And when you're doing demanding cognitive work every morning, when you're pushing into depth and flow states, your brain is burning through nutrients fast. So you eat well. Not perfectly, just well. You prioritize protein at breakfast. You stay hydrated throughout your morning session. You avoid the blood sugar roller coaster that comes from starting your day with pastries and coffee. This isn't about being healthy for health's sake. This is tactical. This is about having the energy to execute on your invisible grind every single day. So you take nutrition seriously, not as a diet, as fuel for the work. Third, you build in recovery. 1 day a week you rest. Not from sleep, from the grind. You wake up at your normal time if you want, but you don't work on your invisible project. You do something else, something restorative. Maybe you read. Maybe you go for a long walk. Maybe you do nothing at all. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that you give your mind a break from the intensity of daily deep work. Because deep work is exhausting, and if you grind 7 days a week for months, you'll burn out. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So you prevent burnout by building in systematic recovery. 1 day a week, every week, no exceptions. Even when you don't feel like you need it. Especially when you don't feel like you need it. Because by the time you feel like you need it, you're already approaching burnout. So you rest proactively, strategically, and that rest makes the other 6 days more effective. Here's a micro challenge for energy management. For the next 2 weeks, track your energy levels at the end of each work session. Use a simple scale, 1 to 10. How much energy do you have left after your session? And track it daily. By the end of 2 weeks, you'll see patterns. Maybe you have more energy after sessions where you slept 8 hours the night before. Now let's talk about the identity shift. Because somewhere around day 60 or 70, if you've been consistent, something interesting happens. You stop identifying as someone who's trying to build a habit. You start identifying as someone who has a habit. You stop saying, I'm trying to wake up early. You start saying, I wake up early. You stop thinking of yourself as someone working on a project. You start thinking of yourself as someone who does this work. This identity shift is subtle, but it's everything. Because once your identity shifts, behavior becomes automatic. You don't have to force yourself to show up. You show up because that's who you are now. That's what you do. But this identity shift doesn't happen by accident. It happens through accumulated proof. Every morning you show up, you're casting a vote for your new identity. Every session you complete, you're adding evidence that this is who you are now. And when you have enough evidence, when the votes pile up, your brain accepts the new identity. You're no longer trying to be disciplined. You are disciplined. You're no longer trying to build something. You are a builder. And that shift, from trying to being, that's when the invisible grind stops feeling like a grind. It just becomes what you do. It becomes part of who you are. So how do you accelerate this identity shift? How do you move from trying to being faster? You use identity-based language. When you talk to yourself, when you journal, when you think about your work, you use present tense identity statements. Not, I want to be a writer. I am a writer who writes every morning. Not, I'm trying to get fit. I'm someone who trains consistently. Not, I hope to build this business. I am a builder who ships work in silence. These statements feel false at first, like you're lying to yourself. But you're not lying. You're programming. You're telling your brain who you're becoming. And your brain, over time, starts to believe it, starts to act like it, starts to be it. Here's a micro challenge for identity shift. For the next 30 days, end each work session by writing one identity statement. Just one sentence, but it has to be present tense. It has to claim the identity you're building. I am someone who shows up in silence. I am someone who honors commitments to myself. I am a person who builds regardless of recognition. Write one per day, and read the full list once a week. By day 30, you'll have 30 identity statements, and reading them will feel different than it did on day 1, because by day 30, they won't feel like aspirations anymore. They'll feel like facts, and that's when you know the identity shift has happened. That's when you know you've become the person who lives the invisible grind naturally. Let's talk about boredom now, because at some point the work will become boring, not hard, just boring, repetitive, unglamorous, the same thing every day. And boredom is dangerous, because boredom makes you crave novelty, and novelty makes you want to change things up, to try something new, to pivot. And pivoting when you're bored, before you've given your current path enough time to work, that's how you end up with a graveyard of unfinished projects. So you need to learn to work through boredom, to find depth in repetition, to make the mundane meaningful. Here's how. You gamify the boring parts, not with external rewards, with internal challenges. Every time you sit down to do the boring work, you set a micro goal. Can I do this faster than yesterday? Can I find one way to optimize this process? Can I improve the quality by just 1%? You're not changing the work. You're changing how you engage with it. You're turning boring into interesting through challenge, through curiosity, through the pursuit of mastery. Because mastery is never boring. Repetition in pursuit of mastery is engaging. It's satisfying. It's meaningful. So you reframe the boring work as mastery work, as the price you pay for expertise. And suddenly it's not boring anymore. It's valuable. But what if you can't make it interesting? What if you've tried the reframe and the work is still just boring? Then you accept the boredom. You don't fight it. You don't try to make it go away. You just acknowledge it. This is boring, and that's okay. Boring work builds foundations, and I need a strong foundation. So I'm going to do boring work today, and tomorrow, and as many days as it takes. You remove the expectation that work should always be exciting. You remove the need for constant stimulation, and you just do the boring work. Because discipline means doing the thing even when it's not fun, even when it's not interesting, even when it's boring. And that discipline, that willingness to be bored in service of a goal, that's rare. That's valuable. That's what separates people who finish from people who start. Here's your micro challenge for boredom. The next time you sit down to work and feel bored, set a timer for 15 minutes. Tell yourself, I'm going to be bored for 15 minutes. And that's fine. And then work through the boredom for just 15 minutes. When the timer goes off, assess. Are you still bored? Or did you find a rhythm? Often boredom is just the resistance at the beginning of a session. If you push through for 15 minutes, flow shows up. But even if it doesn't, even if you're still bored after 15 minutes, you've done 15 minutes of boring work. And that counts. That's progress. So you do another 15, and another. And before you know it, you've done your full session. And boredom didn't stop you. You just worked through it. And that's a skill. A valuable skill. So practice it. Deliberately. Now we need to talk about perfectionism. Because perfectionism and the invisible grind are natural allies. And also natural enemies. They're allies because working in silence removes the pressure to ship before you're ready. You can refine. You can iterate. You can make it better. But they're enemies because perfectionism can trap you in the invisible phase forever. You can keep refining, keep iterating, keep making it better, and never actually ship. Never actually emerge. And that's just fear disguised as standards. So you need to know the difference between excellence and perfectionism. Excellence says, this is really good. It's ready. It might not be perfect, but it's excellent. And excellent is enough. Perfectionism says, it's not quite right. Just one more tweak. Just one more iteration. It'll be ready soon, but soon never comes. Because perfectionism isn't about the work. It's about fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of rejection. Fear of being seen. And if you don't address the fear, you'll hide in the invisible grind forever. So you set deadlines. Hard deadlines. Day 90 is your review day. Day 180 is your launch day. Or whatever timeline makes sense for your work. But you set it in advance. And when that day comes, you ship. Even if it's not perfect. Even if you see things you could improve, you ship. Because done invisible beats perfect and invisible. Every time, here's your micro challenge for perfectionism. Right now, before you continue, set your emergence date. Look at a calendar. Pick a specific date. 3 months from now. 6 months from now. Whatever timeline is reasonable for your work. And write it down. Put it in your calendar. Tell yourself, on this date, I emerge. Period. Not if it's ready. Not if it's good enough. On this date, I emerge. And then, every week, ask yourself, am I on track to have something I'm proud of by that date? Not perfect, proud of. If yes, keep going. If no, adjust your plan. But the date doesn't move. The date is fixed. And that constraint, that hard deadline, that's what kills perfectionism. That's what forces you to ship. So set it now. Let's talk about the plateau. Because after the initial gains, after the first few months when progress feels steady, you'll hit a plateau. A period where you're still showing up, still doing the work, but you're not seeing improvement. You're not getting noticeably better. You're not producing noticeably more. You're just maintaining, and plateaus are frustrating. They make you question whether the work is still worth it, whether you've hit your limit, whether you should try something else. But here's the truth about plateaus. They're preparation for the next jump. Plateaus aren't stagnation, they're consolidation. Your brain is integrating everything you've learned. Your skills are solidifying, and when the consolidation is complete, when everything clicks into place, you'll leap forward, suddenly, dramatically, in ways that surprise even you. But that leap only happens if you push through the plateau. If you keep showing up even when progress feels invisible. So when you hit a plateau, and you will, you don't quit. You don't panic. You don't change everything. You just keep showing up. You trust the process. You know the leap is coming. You just don't know exactly when. So you wait, actively, by continuing to do the work. Here's your micro-challenge for plateaus. When you hit one, when you notice that progress has stalled, you switch your focus from outcome to process. You stop measuring how much better you're getting, and you start measuring how consistent you're being. How many days in a row have you shown up? How many sessions have you completed? How many hours have you logged? You celebrate the inputs instead of the outputs. Because during a plateau, inputs are all you can control. Outputs will come, but they come on their own timeline. So you focus on what you can control. Consistency, effort, showing up. And you let the plateau run its course. You don't rush it. You don't try to force a breakthrough. You just trust that if you keep showing up, the breakthrough will come. And it will. It always does. But only for people who push through the plateau instead of quitting on it. Here's your micro-challenge for handling fear of failure. Write down your worst-case scenario. Be specific. What's the absolute worst thing that could happen if you do this work and it doesn't land? Write it all out. And then, honestly assess. Can you survive that? Can you recover from that? Almost always the answer is yes. The worst case is disappointing, not devastating. And once you see that on paper, once you realize you can survive the worst case, the fear loses its power. You can take the risk. You can do the work. Because you know that even if it doesn't work out, you'll be okay. So write it down. Face the worst case. And then get to work anyway. Let's talk about celebration now. Because the invisible grind is hard. And if you never celebrate, if you never acknowledge your progress, you'll burn out. But celebrating in silence is different than celebrating publicly. Public celebration is about recognition. Silent celebration is about acknowledgement, about honoring yourself, about taking a moment to appreciate what you've done. So we need to build silent celebration rituals. Small, private ways to mark progress and wins. Here's what silent celebration looks like. When you hit a milestone, when you complete a phase, when you have a breakthrough, you mark it in your proof archive. You write down the date, what you accomplished, how it feels, and you take a moment to sit with that feeling, to really feel proud. Not for an audience, just for yourself. Maybe you buy yourself a nice coffee. Maybe you take an extra long walk. Maybe you just sit in the quiet and smile. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that you mark the moment. You acknowledge it. You honor it. Because these moments, these private victories, they're what fuel the long grind. They're proof that the work matters, that you're making progress, that it's all worth it. But here's the key. You celebrate the inputs, not just the outputs. You celebrate the showing up. You celebrate the consistency. You celebrate the hard session where you push through resistance. You don't wait for big external wins to celebrate. You celebrate the internal wins, the discipline, the commitment, the daily choices that compound into results. Because if you only celebrate outcomes, you'll barely celebrate at all. Outcomes are rare, but inputs are daily, so you find ways to celebrate inputs. And that keeps you motivated through the long middle when outcomes aren't visible yet. Here's your micro challenge for silent celebration. Once a week, do a mini celebration ritual. Review your week. Identify one thing you're proud of. It could be that you showed up all 5 days. It could be that you had one session where you reached flow. It could be that you finished a difficult piece of the work. Whatever it is, write it down. And then do something small to celebrate. Make your favorite meal. Watch a movie you love. Take a bath. Read a book. Something that feels indulgent but is actually just self-care. Do this every week and watch how it changes your relationship with the work. Watch how it makes the grind feel less grindy. Because you're acknowledging yourself. You're honoring yourself. And that matters. Let's talk about community now. Because I've been saying work in silence, but that doesn't mean work alone. You can have community. You just need to be strategic about what kind of community. Public community, where you're posting updates and building in public, that's what we're avoiding. But private community, where you have 1 or 2 people who know what you're doing and support you, that can be valuable. So let's talk about how to build private support without breaking your silence. First, choose wisely. You want 1, maybe 2 people who you trust completely. People who understand you. People who respect your process. People who won't push you to share before you're ready. These are your silent accountability partners. And you tell them what you're doing. Not the world, just them. You say, I'm working on something. It's going to take months. I need someone who knows, who I can check in with occasionally, but who won't ask too many questions or push me to go public. Can you be that for me? And if they say yes, you have your private support system. Second, set check-in rules. You don't want constant communication. You don't want daily updates. You want occasional structured check-ins. Maybe once a month. Maybe once every 2 weeks. And in those check-ins, you share high-level progress. Not details. Not play-by-play. Just, I'm still going. I hit a rough patch but pushed through. I'm learning a lot. That's it. And your partner's job is just to listen, to believe in you, to remind you why it matters. Not to coach you or criticize you or offer unsolicited advice. Just to be there. To be a witness. To be support. And that light touch support, that's often all you need to keep going through the hard parts. Third, protect the boundary. Even with private support, you need to be careful. Because well-meaning people can accidentally pull you out of the grind. They'll ask questions. They'll offer suggestions. They'll want to help. And their help, as kind as it is, can become noise. So you maintain boundaries. You thank them for their support. And you keep the check-ins brief and structured. You don't let them become therapy sessions or strategy sessions. You just keep them as anchors, as reminders that someone knows, someone cares, someone believes. And then you go back into the silence, alone, to do the work. Here's your micro challenge for building private support. This week, identify 1 person who could be your silent accountability partner, someone who gets you, someone you trust, and have the conversation. Ask them if they'll be your person. Explain what you need. And if they agree, schedule your first check-in for 1 month from now. Just 1 hour, coffee or a call, where you share where you are and they remind you why it matters. That's it. And then don't talk to them about it again until that scheduled check-in. Let them be there. Let them support. But don't let them become noise. Keep it structured. Keep it light. Keep it supportive. Now let's talk about emergence timing, because this is the decision that makes or breaks everything. When do you actually go public? We talked about the 3 signals: results, readiness, detachment. But let's get more specific. Let's talk about what those actually look like in practice, because vague signals lead to vague decisions, and vague decisions lead to emerging too early or staying silent too long. Both are mistakes, so we need specificity. Results means you have something that works. If you're building a product, it has users who pay. If you're building a skill, you have proof of capability. If you're creating art, you have finished pieces you're proud of. Results are not, it's almost done. Results are, it's done, and it works. So how do you know? You test privately. You show it to 2 or 3 people outside your immediate circle. People who don't know you well enough to be nice out of obligation. And you ask, would you use this? Would you pay for this? Would you recommend this? And if the answer is yes, genuinely yes, not polite yes, then you have results. If the answer is maybe, or with some changes, or not yet, you don't have results. You have progress, and progress isn't ready for emergence yet. Readiness means you have systems in place to handle success. If your product gets 1,000 users tomorrow, can you support them? If your content goes viral, can you handle the attention? If customers flood in, can you deliver? Readiness is operational. It's having the capacity to scale. Even if you don't need that capacity immediately, You need to know you could handle it if it came. So before you emerge, you build the infrastructure. You set up the systems. You prepare for best-case scenarios, not just expected scenarios. And when you've done that, when you know you could handle 10 times the response you expect, you're ready. Detachment means you're not emotionally dependent on the response. This is the hardest one to assess. But here's the test. Imagine your launch gets 0 response. Nobody buys, nobody shares, nobody cares. How do you feel? If the answer is devastated, you're not detached. If the answer is disappointed but okay, you're getting close. If the answer is, I built something I'm proud of, the market will respond when it's ready. And if not, I'll iterate, you're detached. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're not fragile. Your self-worth isn't tied to the response. Your commitment to the work isn't dependent on external validation. And that detachment, that emotional resilience, that's what makes emergence safe. Because you can handle any response, good, bad, or indifferent. So here's your emergence decision protocol. 90 days before your target emergence date, you assess all 3 signals. Do you have results? Rate yourself 1 to 10. Do you have readiness? Rate yourself 1 to 10. Do you have detachment? Rate yourself 1 to 10. If all 3 are at least an 8, you're ready. If any of them are below 8, you identify what's missing and you work on it for the next 90 days. And then you reassess. And you keep reassessing every 90 days until all 3 signals are strong. And then, and only then, you emerge. Not because you're impatient. Not because you've hit an arbitrary timeline. Because you're actually ready. And that readiness makes all the difference.